Well, let's bring in our political strategist now, Susan Smith, former Liberal strategist, co-founder and principal at Blue Sky Strategy Group, Cole Hogan, conservative digital strategist, principal at GT, and George Soule is a former director of communications for the federal NDP. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
So listen, we just heard Pierre Poilievre today essentially reacting to Mark Carney's win by reminding us once again about Brookfield, raising the issue of moving the head office from Toronto to New York. So when it comes to fighting Donald Trump, he questions the credentials of Mark Carney on that level. Is that going to be the millstone around Mark Carney's neck?
I heard Pierre Poilievre on his heels and a man who's worried about his worst nightmare taking place. For Poilievre, he wanted to fight an election against Trudeau on axing the tax, and Canada is broken. Trudeau's gone. The tax is going to be axed. Trump is present in tariffs, and Mark Carney's been elected. So Pierre Poilievre is trying anything he can to distract from the momentum, enthusiasm, and credibility around Mark Carney. I don't think that's going to work. I think people are, when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to make up their minds, they're going to look at Carney's track record in the business world. Maybe there's lots of good things, maybe the odd thing that he'll have to do a better job of explaining. But on the whole, it's a career understanding finance and working to make things better and help economies versus a guy who's been working in question period for 26 years.
Except that the Conservatives keep honing in on this message. So the research must be showing that it's working, Cole.
Yeah, I think Mark Carney is going to have to come up with some sort of answer at some point on Brookfield. Like, clearly he did have some involvement in the decision to move the office from, Toronto and Canada to New York. And, on the issue of Brookfield and on the issue of the financial disclosures and any potential conflicts of interest, this is something he's going to have to find a definitive answer on, because we've seen him say before, why should I do more than what anyone else has in terms of disclosures? Like, well, you're the Prime Minister designate now. Your standard should be higher than everyone else's.
That's not what he said. He said, when it's time for me to do it, I'll do it. And he also indicated that he was working on having all that disclosure done. I expect that to come now that he's been elected. What he also has done is filled out the paperwork for his security clearance, which Mr. Poilievre, despite being opposition leader for 2 years, has not yet done.
Which Mr. Carney raised on stage yesterday, so they too know what they're hitting at. George, what do you make of this? Do you think Brookfield's going to be a bigger issue than it is, not that it's not a concern at this moment in time?
I mean, I'll start by saying that if we can have an election based on security clearances or paperwork filled out, then I'm feeling pretty good about our chances in the NDP. Let those two argue about that paperwork all day long, and I don't think Canadians are going to be there. And I do think there are valid concerns. I think there's valid questions. One, why is Pierre Poilievre refusing to get his security clearance to find out what's going on with foreign interference? And absolutely, why is this guy not more honest about having a key role in moving, a major company, their head office from Toronto to the United States? And especially right now with what's going on with the tariffs, I think that's a big deal. But I do, again, think that all of that only matters if they make that argument about being there for people, right? So being someone who's backed billionaires and moved companies to make more money does say maybe his priority isn't with me and average workers. And so I think that's a legitimate concern. But I think the way Pierre Poilievre's doing it, I think it's just going to continue to hurt him, because again, it looks like he's the nerd in the corner doing procedural arguments. And I understand it, because I think they have had a campaign they've wanted to run for the last 4 or 5 years, and they're not going to be able to run that campaign now, and I think they're scrambling.
Yeah, scrambling, and as we said earlier, the ballot box question seems very much it's going to be about Donald Trump time and again. And what's interesting is we are now expecting an election call sooner rather than later. And if that is the case, we are looking at April the 2nd in the middle of a campaign where Donald Trump is going to announce his counter tariffs on countries all around the world, including Canada. How does that figure out for the party, Susan? How do you think that will benefit or not benefit certain players?
Mr. Carney will be sworn in as Canada's Prime Minister by then, and I think we'll see the difference between, I heard Pierre Poilievre today bragging that he's been studying the books for the last little while. Well, Mr. Carney has actually been involved in his career on helping to make policy decisions, design policy, and implement it. And that's a whole lot different than studying the books. Mr. Carney also has the network around the world that can help Canada shape and implement a response. And Mr. Poilievre's been studying the books. So I don't want Canada to be hurt by whatever Donald Trump does, but whatever moves Trump makes Poilievre's narrative even more difficult, I think.
Yeah. What do you say to that, Cole?
I think during a general election, we're going to see who the better political athlete here is. I think Mark Carney, during the leadership campaign, had some problems with saying one thing and then another. He said he'd use emergency powers to move a pipeline through Canada, but not through Quebec if they don't want it. He said Canada's economy was weak and then strong. He said he worked for Paul Martin when he didn't. Like, the Liberal leadership campaign was not a church basement campaign, and Mark Carney's going to have to actually hit the hustings, and we'll see how well he can actually perform against Pierre Poilievre.
George?
Well, again, I think a lot of this is just kind of a conversation that is missing the whole point, right? I think, you know, the tariffs that are coming in have nothing to do with fact. And so, you know, whoever knows how to deal with that best doesn't really matter. What matters is how much people think they can handle Donald Trump best. Because whoever make the best argument isn't going to win this. It's whoever can stand up to him most, and whoever has the ability to unite Canadians best. And right now, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but right now it's clear that most Canadians don't trust Pierre Poilievre to do that. They just don't. And so if Mr. Carney can earn that respect and that opportunity, then that'll be good for him. He hasn't done it yet, so we'll see. But I think that, again, that's the real challenge, because the facts don't matter. If, like, really quickly, just one small example that's really stuck out to me lately is as Trump goes after, you know, saying that they don't need Canada's trees and because there's too big a tariff on it. Well, if Donald Trump wants to get rid of the tariffs on softwood lumber, then there's a whole lot of Canadians and Canadian workers that I used to work for would be very happy to see that happen. Those are American tariffs on softwood lumber, and it's the donors of the Republican and Democrat parties that make sure those tariffs exist. So, like, Donald Trump doesn't understand the facts. So it's all well and good that these guys are both studying up or have always known it, and I don't deny either one of those two things. But it's going to be about who people actually think have their back in that fight.
Yeah. Okay, but you also said that if Mark Carney can bring Canadians along to that point of view, and, you know, to Cole's point, Mark Carney is not a politician, and
nope.
and I know there's an answer line to that, but ultimately, when you're on the hustings, you have to prove that you can step up, and is that going to be a problem for Mark Carney if he's never had to prove himself on that level before?
Well, he's proven himself as the governor of the Bank of Canada, and he's proven himself when he worked at finance in the finance department for Paul Martin and the governor of the Bank of England. He is not a career politician. He's never going to be a career politician unless he gets reelected several times. He's not going to be a slick soundbite machine. That's not what he's going to do. Pierre Poilievre will come out with his boxing gloves. He'll drop them and try some bare-fisted stuff, I'm sure. I think Carney can do the sparring that he needs to, but he's an economist. He's been a central banker. He's someone who is kind of the steady, calm, reassuring hand we need to lead the country. And Canadians have lost faith in their career politicians, and I think a breath of fresh air is a breath of credible experience. Fresh air is what the country's looking for.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, when I look at the Liberal leadership results from last night in terms of the riding breakdown, there was only about 17 ridings where Mark Carney got about 1,000 votes, and a lot of those areas overlap with the 2011 30-person caucus. So I think the support is concentrated in Canada's cities, and it's going to be interesting to watch Mark Carney try to advocate for a fourth term for the Liberals and bring a fresh coat of paint to, you know, an old busted-down vehicle that the Canadian public has a lot of problems with. So we're going to have to see if you can actually campaign and keep up with Poilievre, particularly in a debate.
Okay. And George?
Well, I'm not going to deny where the NDP sits right now in the polls, and I'll be very real about that. But again, like, you're dealing with an untested Mark Carney, who, frankly, if we all closed our eyes and pictured to what a prime minister should look like, much of us wouldn't like to admit it, but it's somebody that looks like Mark Carney. So he's got that going for him. But I think also, does he actually connect? And yes, we have an experienced politician, but he's experienced and disliked. And the more people get to know him, the more they dislike him in Pierre Poilievre. So I do think there's an opportunity, if these guys, again, can fight over either the policy or over who's worse than the other, there is an opportunity for the NDP to take that ground of who's got your back. I know it's going to be a challenge and something that Jagmeet's struggled with in the past, but I think this opportunity, watch this debate go on, and I think there's an opportunity for the NDP to say, these guys are fighting for politics, we want to fight for you.
Mm-hmm. An opportunity, as you say, and we talked about it last night, where we expect that Mark Carney will move very quickly in terms of getting an election writ dropped and an election called. But I do want to do one more go around here as to whether or not you think it is advantageous for your individual parties, whether it be a short or long campaign. What do you think, Susan?
Liberals, I think, get into the campaign as quickly as they can. The Conservatives have a big war chest to spend, and everybody has the same rules come election spending so soon. I don't think a you know, a 72-day campaign like Stephen Harper did in 2015 is the way to go. I think 30 days more or less is the way to do it.
Okay, so a short campaign, Cole?
I think on the Conservative side, we've been in campaign mode basically for the last 2 years. I think, you know, the membership, the volunteers, the staff are ready to hit the ground running and salivating for a chance to actually campaign. Now that we know who the Liberal leader is, we know who all the players are on the field, like everyone's ready to play the game now.
Okay, George?
Well, I mean, frankly, I know there's always talk about the NDP is never ready for an election campaign, but I've been doing this a long time, and we're never ready, including in 2011. What does happen for the NDP during a campaign is the ground gets leveled, basically. So, like, the 4 main leaders in Quebec, or the 3 main across the country, get kind of equal coverage, at least in the media, in a bigger way than we usually do. So I think campaign is good for the NDP. I will say quickly that I think there's value for Mark Carney, frankly, when he's negotiating as Prime Minister, for the House to have made some kind of decision together, for the parties to officially have said, we're behind, we're united, we're going to fight this fight with the tariffs. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think there would be value in the House sitting briefly with an understanding that it's like a day or whatever to vote that through, show unity, and then go to the campaign.
Well,
it's not going to happen, but I think it'd be good.
The Conservatives would never do that. I think what we have with the Premiers United, in the absence of the House of Commons passing a motion showing some kind of consensus, which I think in the current climate is actually impossible, with the Premiers United, under a new Prime Minister, and the country's united. I mean, I think Canadians feel united. The elbows up and the demonstrations on Parliament Hill, and whether you boo or you sing the Canadian anthem really loudly or the American anthem with a boo, I think we are united in a way, and he'll have the mandate and I think the trust of Canadians. But it'd be good to get an election over with and then have a Prime Minister who's leading. Okay,
but very quickly, short, what's the for the NDP?
I mean, I would never want to live a 78-day campaign ever again. So my vote's always for short, no matter what.
Okay, just for convenience, everyone's on side for the short campaign. Okay, Susan, Cole, George, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.